How's it going, everybody? My name's Moriarty. Welcome back to another video, and today we are definitely not in the studio. We are in my basement of all places because, just like you, I've been in self-isolation for well over a month now. Kinda sucks, but it is what it is. But I'm definitely still itching to shoot, and just because we're self-isolating doesn't mean we can't still do that. So today I'm gonna show you a one light product photo shoot setup of this here bourbon bottle. Pretty nice bourbon too. Let's do it. Alright, now since we aren't in the studio today, we are going to have to be very creative. Here in my house, I have almost no gear. Literally, all I have in my house right now is a single speed light, no modifiers, no props, no stands, no nothing. But like I said earlier, I am seriously itching to shoot, so today we're going to see what we can do with one speed light, a white reflective surface I had lying around, a TV, and some creative editing. Stick with me on the TV part. Alright, so a little while ago, I was actually gifted this beautiful bottle of Colonel Taylor small batch bourbon. It's fantastic bourbon, and I've actually been meaning to bring it into the studio to shoot it for a while now before I open it up and drink it. It is a beautiful bottle, it tastes even better, and it's actually pretty hard to find, so I would be crazy not to take advantage of this bottle and shoot it before I open it up. If you are a fellow bourbon lover and you haven't heard of this, I'll definitely make sure to put a link to this bottle in the description below so you can check it out. I definitely recommend it. But anyways, let's check out my setup. Alright, here's my setup, and it is literally as simple as it can get. I have my bottle of bourbon here propped up on a piece of black plexiglass that I had lying around. Don't laugh at me for propping it up on my patio furniture. We're working with what we got here. And over there, I have my Canon 5D Mark III up on a tripod with an 85mm lens on it. And I don't even have a trigger or a remote. So for my trigger, I just have my camera set to a 10-second timer. And for my remote, I actually have a second speed light on the top of my camera that's gonna act as a trigger for this speed light here that's gonna be on slave mode. But if you have a trigger and if you have a remote, please use those. It'll make your life so much easier than I'm making mine right now, but I'm working with what I got. And most importantly, the last thing I have is a TV. I'm gonna get to that in just 1 second though. And that is literally it, guys. It doesn't get any simpler or any more sketchy than this, if I'm gonna be honest. But if we're stuck from home and we wanna keep shooting, that's what we gotta do. All right, now let me explain this whole TV idea because I'm sure all of you are wondering about that right now. So I'm at home, I have no props, so obviously building an entire set is out of the question, unfortunately. So then naturally the next thing I thought of was to just do a composite this bottle with a background behind it. The problem with that is, with the amount of transparent glass I'm working with, doing a composite on that level will be near impossible. So I'm doing something that I've actually never done before. I'm gonna pull my background up onto my TV and shoot it that way. There we go. And honestly, as I started testing this idea, I was actually really surprised at how well it was working. Once you get your exposure dialed in, it actually looks pretty realistic, and the cool thing is you can swap out your backgrounds with one click. And all I did was I went over to Google Images and I turned on the copyright-free filter, and I just pulled a ton of images from bourbon barrels to speakeasy bars to cozy cabins. My only criteria while picking out these backgrounds was to find a nice dark image with a nice warm glow to it, because I wanted a nice amber glow to reflect through the bourbon in the bottle and the glass, and I needed the right background to sell that. But I ended up landing on this great image of this nice cozy warm living room scene, but honestly any of the images I pulled could have worked out great, and I actually might go back and revisit them some other time. Just remember to pick a perspective, focal length, and color temperature that would make sense with the environment that you're actually shooting in. You want it to feel very believable and not like a composite, and that's really easy to happen with this technique. And the last thing I did was just adjust the saturation and color temperature of the image, as well as add a slight blur to it to mock the depth of field that I would get if I were actually shooting in this scene. Alright, so like I said before, we might only have one light here today other than the one that's on top of my camera that's only going to be serving as a trigger, but we can utilize multiple exposures and some creative editing in Photoshop to make the final image look like it's a multi-light setup. And this sort of technique is almost required for a setup like this because I do want a nice amber glow coming through the bourbon, and this background just isn't going to give that to me. You'll see exactly why in just 1 second, but for a bottle like this, you're never going to be able to get the shot that we're going for with just one light and one exposure. So what we're going to do is take 2 exposures. The first one is going to be for the background itself, as well as the label of the bottle, and the second exposure is going to be for that nice amber glow coming through the bourbon. And then later, all we're going to do is take those 2 images and put them together in Photoshop. All right, let's get shooting. Okay, let's start with the main shot. I have my camera over there and it's lined up with the bottle and the glass in the background in a very believable way. If you have the line between your camera, your subject, and your background set up with a focal length and an angle that wouldn't make much sense in real life, then the final photo is not going to read real whatsoever. The next and super important thing that we have to do is to actually expose for the TV itself. Now, this is a really weird one for me. Most of the time, I'm in the studio working with only off-camera flash, so if I want to adjust the exposure of my image, I just go down to the power pack and adjust the power of the lights themselves. But here, I have to use my camera settings to ensure that my TV is exposed properly. On that note, because we're adjusting our camera settings so much, you want to make sure that any ambient lights or windows that are in your home aren't affecting the image either. For my setup here, I found that my perfect exposure was with an ISO of 100, an aperture of f2.8, and with a shutter speed of 1/20th. As far as why I picked those settings, for my ISO, I wanted it as low as possible to have the cleanest shot I can. I'm almost always shooting at 100 ISO. And for my aperture, I wanted to utilize some real depth of field as well as to let in more light that I could, so that's why I'm shooting at f2.8. And from there, I just finished the exposure with my shutter speed, and since my camera over there is on a tripod, I don't have to worry about going too low with my shutter speed. I'm totally fine at 1/20th. Just like with our overhead lights and our windows, if you are also using a on-camera flash as a trigger for your main light, I definitely recommend making sure that that light on your camera is not affecting your shot whatsoever. Make sure you have a nice dark image before you start, because you don't want the light bleeding in from that camera and hitting your shot. You only want it to serve as a trigger. I have mine on top of my camera pointed straight up to the ceiling with the power as low as it can go. This will be just enough so it can trigger my main light, but not so much where it'll actually show up on my subject. For my main light over here, I have it actually set to 1/64th power. That's pretty low, but I really don't need that much light here. My settings are set up in the way so that I'm already letting in a ton of light, so 1/64th will be totally fine. And remember, this first shot is just for the background and the label itself, so all I'm going to do is kind of walk off camera here, almost just behind my camera that I'm shooting with, hold the light up like this, off to the side so I don't get any glare off the TV, and fire my first shot. All right, now you can see that the light on the glass of the bottle itself doesn't look that great, but remember that this shot is only for the label and the background. And I think they both look really great. The background is out of focus in a very believable way, and the label itself is nice and evenly lit. No, in this scene, the label itself wouldn't be highly exposed and evenly lit, but I'm going for more of a magazine look here. I'm going more for an advertising look than a realistic look. All right, and now for my favorite part. If you've watched any of my other bottle photography tutorials, you'll notice that we're missing one thing. And that is, I always love to use two whiteboards on either side of my subject to give the bottle and the glass a nice refined edge to really stand out from the background. Trust me, this technique will always take your bottle product photography to the next level. The thing is, I don't actually have any whiteboards in my house, and I don't have any more lights to utilize, so I'm going to be creative and take advantage of my background that's already here. So check this out. As you can see here, I pulled my image into Photoshop to shoot with, and that was intentional. And that's because I wanted to take two rectangles and create two white bars on either side of my background. And guys, these here are going to be my whiteboards. So I took the white bars and I slightly tinted them a little bit yellow to match the warm glow that comes through the overall image, and check out what happens when I take another photo. All right, tell me that doesn't look 10 times better. Can you guys see the before and after of the nice crisp white lines that this bottle and this glass now has? Again, this is just going to help the bottle and the glass itself stand out from the background and totally take this shot to the next level. All right, before we move on to exposure number 2, I'd like to take a second just to remind you, if you're liking this video and you like my content, I'd really appreciate if you considered subscribing and hitting the notification bell below. That way you can know when I post more videos like this. All right, so we have our first exposure for the label, the nice refined edge, as well as the background. But like I said before, I want a nice amber glow blasting through this bourbon, like the fire from this background is just radiating through the glass. The problem is, the only way to achieve this effect is to take a nice white surface, put it directly behind the subject, and blast that white surface full of light. Obviously, you can see the problem here. If I put a white surface behind here, I'm going to completely block my background. And considering we don't even have another light to do this, these are all things pointing towards taking a second exposure. So I'm gonna do that technique I just described. Here, I have a nice reflector. It's a circle reflector. They're like $20 on Amazon. Any photographer should have multiple of these. And I have it set to the white side. And all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna hold it directly behind my subject, like I said before. And I'm gonna take that light I have and hold it below it and just pointed straight at the white surface so it illuminates this white surface and makes a beautiful glow radiating through the bottle. And by the way, my light is going to be set to 1/64th power again. It's really convenient that my power is going to stay consistent for both of my exposures that I'm doing today. Let's try it out, and I'm going to have to be very quick with this one. All right, and as you can see by the photo, I don't really think I have to explain why I did what I just did. You can clearly see the bottle just absolutely explode with color. The beautiful amber caramel color of the bourbon is absolutely radiating through the bottle, and now the bottle really stands out from our background exactly how we want it to. But obviously you can see we lost everything we worked for with the background and the label that we did in the first shot. So this is another reason why we're gonna have to combine that first shot with the glow from the second shot to get our final image. All right, so we have both shots. They both look great, but I think there's one last thing to do. This glass is empty and I'm thirsty. All right, I'm just kidding. I'm not actually gonna drink this. I don't think I deserve to drink a bourbon this good if I wasted it for a photograph by letting ice melt all in it while we're trying to shoot. Plus, the bottle would have to be opened and it would be partially empty in the final shot. That wouldn't make any sense either. So I just did a little bit of styling magic. To get liquid to look just like whiskey, all you need is some tea. I brewed up some regular old black tea I had, and then I diluted it further to achieve the right hue to match the bourbon. Now I can do this shoot as many times as I want without ever actually having to open this bottle. All right, it's a really good thing that we got those two shots dialed in before we got our final image with the whiskey in there, because now I have an ice cube in there and we need to hurry up and get these two shots again before it melts. On that note, I would definitely recommend investing in some fake ice so you don't have to rush this part. All the fake ice that I normally use is in the studio with everything else, so I'm gonna hurry up and get those two shots that we just did a second ago. All right, and just like that, we are done. We have both of our shots ready to roll, and honestly, I'm pretty pumped with them. So all there's left to do is to tear all this down, maybe pour myself a glass of this bourbon, and meet you all in Photoshop. All right, so as you can see, I brought both of our exposures here into Photoshop. I did run both of these through Lightroom real quick, just to do some basic adjustments like straightening the images, cropping them to my liking, and doing some quick basic edits, but now they're ready to combine. And I do want to keep this video as short as I can, so I'm not going to go over every last detail of how I put together these images, but if you guys have any questions about what I do, please leave them in the comments below, and I'll definitely make sure to respond to each and every question. But at the end of the day, all I'm doing is creating a few layer masks, so it's pretty simple. All right, let's go into our final file. So this is a completed file. I'm just going to turn on each layer that I did one by one to show you all my process. And if you have any questions, again, please leave them below. Our main layer is going to be our first shot that we did. This is the shot for the label and the background, and this is going to be our base layer. And on top of it, I brought in our second shot that we did for the glowing bottle, and I'll turn that on to show you how great that looks. You can see just how much this does for the shot, just how much it makes the bottle pop from that background and really stand out as the subject matter of this image. To achieve this result, all I did was create a layer mask down here, and I painted in the areas where I wanted the glow to shine through. If we go back to our original image, you can see that the parts of the bottle that don't have any bourbon are just shining white through, and obviously we don't want that in our final image. So again, I just painted in the areas that have the bourbon, which is this part of the bottle, the bottom of the bottle, and the bottom of the glass. One thing that was very important that I made sure not to do was to paint over these beautiful crisp white edge lines that we worked very hard to achieve. And from that, the shot is basically complete. From here on, there are just a few details we need to touch up. The most glaring touch-up that I'm sure all of you have noticed by now is the neck of this bottle. So the reason this is there is because Colonel Taylor does come with a label on it to seal it. I decided to take that label off, but unfortunately it left a horrible residue. So I did have to take a third exposure that I didn't show you guys, where I just rotated the bottle to a part where that didn't have any residue on it, and I just painted in that third shot. Hopefully when you guys are doing your own photos at home with your own bottles, you won't run into this issue and you'll just be able to do your final image with 3 exposures. So I'll turn those on for you and show you some of my touch-ups. I also painted in some of that background to make it shine through, make it a little bit more realistic. Still not perfect, but it's better than it was before. And that's it for the composite. All we have left are a few touch-ups, and these are very simple. I'll just breeze through them very quickly. We have some spot removal and some dodging and burning. This is just removing some imperfections and brightening and darkening parts of the images to my liking. I have some shadow control to bring our attention more towards the bottle and the glass rather than the background. Same thing with highlight minimization. I did think those highlights back there were way too strong. I think this happened because of how the TV exposed in the sensor of my camera. I think the highlights and the saturation just came off as way too harsh. That's good to know for next time when we do this technique of using a TV, but I just took this layer to tone that down a little bit. I have a curves layer here. I also added some grain to this layer. The muted blacks and the grain from this curve layer. I did this because Colonel Taylor bourbon is a very sophisticated, classy, old school bourbon. It has a very rich history, and I just think the muted blacks and grain that I've added to this add to the branding of Colonel Taylor and add to that sophistication. This next layer is for the label return. Now the return of the label, that's the back part, the back label that shines through the bottle. It was just bothering me a little bit. I didn't want to paint in the glowing bourbon here because I think that would have detracted from the label. The color of the glow and the label would have blended together too much. So I made the decision to make it all black back there. I'll turn on this layer and show you. And making it all black just makes the label not distracting, and it lets the label pop out on the front even more. From there, I just had a brightness contrast layer that I adjusted to my liking, a hue saturation layer where I kind of just toned down the overall saturation just a little bit, a color balance layer where I added some blues to the shadows as well as changed the color of the highlights ever so slightly, and one more hue saturation mask. I loved the hue and saturation on the bottle itself, but I didn't like how saturated the background was, so I just toned it down a little bit. And for a little extra flair, let's throw the logo on there. Now you definitely don't want to go off and use somebody's logo without their permission, or if you're going to be making money off of your photo in any way. So we're going to turn that off, keep it as is, and I think we have a really solid shot here. Now, is this the greatest shot I've ever done? No. Could it be better? Sure. With how limited I was, I had to settle with certain things. For one, the TV background did some really weird things to the highlights and saturation of the photo I used. I talked about that a little bit a second ago. Also, if I was in the studio, I could have been able to be super meticulous with my bounce cards and my bottle glow and everything I did. Also, the ice I used wasn't great. It's very cloudy and not very clear. I definitely would have preferred to use some fake ice, and the added benefit of that would be that I wouldn't have had to rush through my final shots. But given what I had, I'm happy with this shot, and at the very least, it gave me something to do today. Alright, and that is it, everyone. I really hope you all enjoyed the video, and I hope you can take some of the things I did here today to do a shoot of your own at your own home while we're all itching to get out there and shoot. If you do, let me know by sending me your images on Instagram. I'd really love to see them. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed the video, please consider hitting the like button and the subscribe button, and remember to tune in next time. Stay safe and see you soon.